So, have you ever looked at one of those world maps showing where a country has its embassies, and you notice all those blank spots? It's so easy to look at those gaps and assume the worst, right? Like there's some kind of diplomatic drama, a cold shoulder or something. But the real story is usually way less traumatic, and honestly, a lot more practical.
Yeah, when you see those missing embassies, your mind probably jumps to all sorts of conclusions. Strained relationships, political standoffs, maybe they're not even talking to each other. I mean, that's a totally natural assumption to make. But what if I told you that assumption is almost always wrong?
The reality is that it's usually less about any kind of high-stakes international feud and way more about the simple nuts and bolts of things, like budgets, resources, and just plain smart, calculated priorities.
To really get why embassies aren't just sprinkled everywhere, we've got to start with a really basic concept about how they work in the first place, and it's something a lot of people misunderstand.
So here's the thing, and this might actually surprise you. There is absolutely no international law or rule that says a country has to have an embassy in every other nation. None. It's completely a policy choice. Each country gets to decide for itself where it wants to establish a mission, how many it's going to run, and how it wants to manage its relationships around the world.
Okay, so if it's a choice, then what's the single biggest thing driving that decision? Well, it pretty much all comes down to one very powerful thing.
You guessed it, money. Running an embassy isn't just about finding a nice building and planting a flag out front. The costs are absolutely astronomical. We're talking millions, sometimes even tens of millions of dollars a year just to keep a single post running in a major city.
And just think about how quickly those costs stack up. You've got to buy or lease prime real estate. You need to install incredibly sophisticated security systems to protect people and information. You have to pay competitive salaries for everyone, from the top diplomats to the local staff. And then you have all the day-to-day costs on top of that. This financial reality forces every single country, big or small, to make some tough choices and prioritize.
And that financial pressure is exactly where strategy comes in. Deciding where you're going to spend that limited pool of money isn't random at all. It's like a series of calculated moves on a global chessboard.
Countries place their embassies very strategically. Of course, they're going to prioritize their major trading partners to help the economy. They'll focus on key security allies to keep things safe and on important regional hubs to have some influence. And naturally, you have to have a presence in cities like New York, Geneva, or Brussels. Those are the nerve centers where organizations like the UN are based.
But on the flip side, there are really good reasons to avoid opening a permanent mission somewhere. If a place is just too dangerous, if your staff are going to face credible threats, or if the local infrastructure just can't support an embassy, well, you have to decide if the huge risk and cost are even worth it.
So this brings us to a really important question. If a country doesn't have a physical building somewhere, how does it actually do diplomacy and maintain a relationship?
And the answer is that modern diplomacy has evolved way beyond just being tied to a specific street address. In the 21st century, it's all about being flexible, creative, and building networks.
So let's look at how this actually works. A really common approach is the multi-country embassy. For example, an embassy in one major capital might also handle relations for 2 or 3 neighboring countries. Or you could have a non-resident ambassador who's based somewhere else but just travels in for important meetings. And for really specific issues, countries can send out roving missions of experts who go wherever they're needed.
So let's circle all the way back to where we started and officially bust some of the biggest myths about those empty spots you see on the diplomatic map.
The myth is that no embassy means a country isn't recognized, or that the two nations are enemies. The reality? An embassy has nothing to do with formal recognition, and the decision is almost always about logistics and strategy, not bad feelings. So what might look like a diplomatic snub is really just a country making smart choices in a world with limited resources.
So the bottom line is this: an empty spot on the map almost never signals a lack of friendship. What it does signal is a very practical calculation about where a country can best invest its limited time, money, and people to get its most important work done.
If you take away just one thing from this explainer, let it be this: a physical presence does not equal importance. A permanent brick-and-mortar building is just one tool in a very large and, frankly, an increasingly modern diplomatic toolkit.
And all of this leaves us with a really fascinating question for the future. In an age of instant digital communication and these flexible networked diplomatic missions, will the traditional embassy one day become a relic of the past? Or will its symbolic power and practical uses mean it's always going to be the cornerstone of international relations? How nations choose to talk to each other tomorrow is a story that's still being written.